Alright, YouTube, I thought I would make a response to Varg's rather good video, largely on point, regarding capitalism and Stefan Molyneux and his suggestions. Essentially, Molyneux is, I believe he's an ANCAP, actually, more or less, or sort of the missing link between, you could call it, ANCAP libertarian ideology and civic nationalism, so to speak. I go a bit further into nationalism than Molyneux does, I think, which I'm sort of, I would be the missing link between these two individuals. Varg has left sort of the church burning stuff behind in favor of survivalism, the idea of being rural, being able to survive what he sees as a coming struggle, really launched by the Western world. I happen to agree largely. Unfortunately, I'll say, in spirit, that this is something that could happen. I would like to point out my thoughts on this general argument between the idea of capitalism, communism, and so forth. Varg points out, for instance, that capitalism is not invariably a better ideology than what you could term communism or something closely approximating. He points out Norway. I would like to point out that Norway is an extremely oil-rich nation that is also sparsely populated. I found it slightly funny that he left out the fact that it's also overwhelmingly white. Yeah, I would think that that would be something that Varg's fans probably would clamor for, more or less. I will say this, though. It overlooks, this is perhaps not the best comparison that one could make, because Venezuela is still using 50-year-old technology to extract its oil, without the ability to even refine it. Norway's got the creme de la creme of modern technology, specifically because it allows investment into its oil sector. Additionally, the other thing, the really big one, is that Maduro, when he came to power, it's not like Norway during its oil boom. When Maduro and Chavez and these other individuals took hold, and they're socialists slash, you could say, communists, what they did is they took an enormous amount of the potential income from oil, and instead of spending it as Norway has, largely on infrastructure, with enough welfare to see that people were taken care of, they spent virtually all of it on the latter. Almost nothing went into actual human development. Thus, I would agree that it's not the overarching ideology's problem, but at the same time, it is the problem of the political system itself. It's not just economic. It's has nothing to do with, well, Venezuela and Norway supposedly being similar economic systems. Well, that means there's no difference between them. That is not actually correct. The spending of that actual inflow of cash on different things was vastly different. Maduro has continued the Chavez policies of frittering away almost all of the money coming in on giving people dishwashers and more food in the state-run stores and so forth. When last I checked, Norway had private business entities. Yes, there was a lot of state control, but at the same time, there were stores that weren't state-run in the nation of Norway. The idea that it is outright state control, I think, is not entirely true. Now, he may have grown up in a period where that was more true, but again, last I checked, there were private outlets as well in Norway. You'd be hard-pressed to find them in Venezuela. So I'm not sure that Norway truly, in an ideological sense, rises to outright communism. Socialism, certainly. And certainly its rudiments may have come from Comintern sort of stuff, but it's gone beyond that. Venezuela, meanwhile, their leaders are still spending everything on, again, dishwashers and microwave ovens and things, subsidizing them heavily for the people. That's great from a human development standpoint while the income is good. Once the oil prices collapse, though, Norway has branched out. It invested in infrastructure to allow its oil to be profitable at a lower cost. It invested in other forms of infrastructure, and it developed things as well in a sense of literacy. Norway is among the most literate cultures. Venezuela is not. Therein would lie, I guess, the difference. Secondly, He points out the evil United States with its capitalism is going to bomb the world. He is correct when he states that the United States economy as currently envisioned cannot survive without war. He's absolutely correct, and I think that it's absolutely sad that that's the case. He's correct that the United States benefited while everyone else was crushed by World War II. We didn't get domestically bombed here. We had Pearl Harbor, thought it was a great coup. Nobody was firebombing New York City. Nobody firebombed Boston or Atlanta or any of these other locations. That's true. One of the reasons our economy boomed after the Second World War is simply because a lot of the industry, especially the heavy industry in Europe, was completely debilitated. The Germans had bombed largely the infrastructure and industry of England, of the British, as well as the French. Some of that got bombed by approaching Western forces as well as we moved in to dislodge the Germans. Certainly the Soviets suffered an enormous manpower loss. So in that vacuum of competition, oddly enough, and this is a point that I'm going to make, the lack of competition is important here. It's an important statement to make. That allowed the United States to grow almost to an unlimited degree for the first decade after the war. Our industry shot ahead. The sort of nifty 50s and super 60s stuff that you get with the sitcoms and people with their perfect atomic era houses, and then there's a mushroom cloud in the background, obviously. That was prefaced by the loss of so much industry in the rest of the world that there was a vacuum for consumer goods that the United States capitalized upon. There was also a new market because of the Iron Curtain. For military goods, we seized upon that. We became the kingpin of the Western Bloc, and then we sold weapons to everybody else. That is true. But I would point this out. Lack of competition. That's not capitalism. What Varg is actually attacking here is not real capitalism. He's attacking corporatism. I attack it. Many others within the Western world attack it. People here in the United States are increasingly uncomfortable with the way that business is done here. They're realizing, whether Republicans or Democrats or whoever else is in charge, a lot of the money flowing around is being taken up by multinational corporations and banks that do not have our best interests at mind. They certainly don't care about how many people in Yemen or Pakistan or Syria die. You look around at these countries, yeah, of course profit's being made off them. And that's the problem. That wasn't the way the United States was supposed to operate. The free market principle that our founders had in mind was that individuals, unsullied by the state, could make a profit. We didn't need to be involved in all this crap. We lose people too in these endeavors. The people running the United States look at us as just flesh bags to be put in body armor, given a gun, and marched off to the front lines. That's the problem. And it's not capitalism. It doesn't trickle down to anybody here. It doesn't help anybody here. I've talked for months about how Trump's nativism light / populism light is a mild form of reform. That's what it is. It doesn't matter whether we embrace modern libertarianism in a tempered manner, or civic nationalism, or tribal racial nationalism, or something else under the sun. It doesn't matter. All we have to do is restore our country. The problem then becomes the grand chessboard, because all those people that our corporatist government has angered since World War II, because that's when we became no longer a free market. You look at NAFTA, the TPP. These aren't free market, free trade deals. They have nothing to do with free trade. They have to do with censorship. They have to do with more government control, not less. Free trade implies the government's taking a hands-off approach. Yes, the Western world is under the control of people who are technically capitalist, because that's the moniker they happen to use. It's like people have fallen, and I think Varg is suffering from this. He seems to believe that all current regimes fall under either the umbrella of socialism / communism, or else they're capitalist nations. That may have been true a century ago. It's not true today. States run by neoconservatives, neoliberals, and every other associated group are neither. They're not socialist regimes. They're not distributing any significant proportion of wealth back to the people. Those that are supposedly capitalistic, can a person actually make a living, specifically on their own? In order to be true capitalism, a person has to be left alone largely by the state. If a person wants to raise their own kids the way they want to raise them, homeschool them, Yeah, that's fine. Essentially, the utopia that Varg seems to speak about, oddly enough, is echoed in the wisdom of our founding fathers, who never envisioned the time that the United States population would be making money for other people by being brute manpower off in some desert somewhere. That's the problem that I have with what he's saying. He is correct in presuming that the economies of the Western world, run supposedly again by capitalists, are war economies. They do need war to survive. But that's not capitalism. That's not what it means. I've looked at what Hitler said regarding capitalism and communism, offering his third way, so to speak. And it's the same problem. He appears to have conflated what was then so-called capitalism with actual capitalism. Even going back to the end of the 1800s, we were not technically a capitalist nation. In a limited sense, we were. But you didn't have enough controls in place regarding the U.S. Constitution, which should have been strictly interpreted, not interpreted helter-skelter all over the place, to actually keep monopolization at bay. And since then, we've constantly been trying to balance how do we make a profit with how do we ensure that other people are capable of making a profit if they're entrepreneurs so that our economy can keep growing. And it's a losing battle. We will lose this battle in time. Yeah, he is right. World War III will probably erupt because the Western world will go a little bit too far in regards to Russia or China, or the Eastern world will go a little bit too far in regards to NATO, and things will fall apart. But boiling down Norway's success and Venezuela's lack thereof to the fact that the former is in NATO and so forth, that's an oversimplification. I can't possibly agree with that. It has more to do with the fact that the government of Norway was intelligent enough, whether communist, capitalist, doesn't matter what you want to call them, to invest in something other than giving people microwave ovens, whereas the government of Venezuela wasn't. When you're starting near the bottom, economically speaking, Venezuela just sort of coming out of the primitive stage of human development, suddenly finds itself with a far leftist government and more oil than it can possibly sell. What do they use it on? Do they invest some of that oil revenue in making sure that they can maximize the efficiency of increased pumping so that they can weather the storm if oil prices drop? No, say they. We're going to use that on welfare. Oil prices will never drop. And they took a gamble and they lost. That's why their economy is shit. Has nothing to do with, it has to do with an embargo from the NATO countries. They've got enough oil that they could sell just to non-NATO members, and they'd do fine. They could sell to all of Latin America, nobody would care. They could sell to Africa. They could sell to the Chinese. They could sell to the Russians, who would love to buy it, refine it, and resell it. They could sell to anybody. The United States would probably buy from them, except that it's going to be difficult to do that because they don't have the technology to pump it adequately. They have to charge more for it to be worth them to even take it out of the ground or out of the water somewhere. That's the problem. And to blame capitalism for all the ills of the Eastern world, as though the concept of, yes, a person should be entitled to the sweat of their own brow, how is that fundamentally, remarkably that different from what you're espousing yourself? You're overlooking things. Here's the perennial problem between certain nationalist movements or tribalistic elements and actual capitalism. You're smearing actual capitalism with the same brush that you're smearing corporatism. They're not the same thing. We shouldn't use the term capitalism to describe what the United States currently suffers under. And the people here, yeah, we're suffering. Trust me, we are. The Western Europeans, you look at them and say, things aren't going that well in some of these. Yeah, we're all suffering because there's corporatism. Government intervenes in every aspect of life. We've got bureaucratic red tape miles and miles long. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is a simplistic system. Yes, you go out, you try to make a profit. What's so hard to understand about that? Some company making a profit off of human misery, especially when it involves foreign affairs, or some grant through the government to sell weapons to go kill people overseas, that's not capitalism. That's not what it means. It's not the same thing. The idea that capitalism is just, profit is driven, and it happens to be non-governmental. Intervention is not the same kind of capitalism that you are thinking of when you say that. Interventionism is the government is still involved. The government's there to ensure profit. The government is necessary within the mix to make sure a profit can even be made. Because unless the government is using its own capabilities to fuck somebody over overseas, or fuck somebody up domestically, or fuck something else up so it can sell you a snake oil cure, there's no profit to be made for these companies. Many of them, they're not even from the US. Some of these companies are from the Eastern Bloc, but you don't see it. What you don't understand is, for instance, look at what happened with Uranium One. This is something I would like Varg to look up. Look at what happened with, this is a Russian company that wants to buy US uranium, and Madam Hillary Clinton, our own favorite neoliberal war-hawking interventionist, secures a deal for them. I'm sure she got millions of dollars for this, to sell a bunch of US uranium to a Russian company. How do you explain this when the entire premise of how you're looking at the entire subject of capitalism, communism, whatever, is that US and Western Bloc and NATO shut out completely some sort of Eastern Bloc? It's not the way the world operates anymore. It's just not the way it operates. Russia is part of that same system. They operate in a corporatist, interventionist manner too. Putin is an oligarchist. That's all he is. He's taken from the same sort of lineage of the rest of these oligarchs. It's the same system. The people of Russia, they have no more right to the sweat of their brow than the people of the United States. I would say, in this sense, myself as an American libertarian / civic nationalist, I've got much more in common with somebody who apparently is waiting for society to collapse so he can live a survivalistic tribal existence than I would any globalist, any neoliberal, any neocon, anything close to them. They do make money off of war. It doesn't really matter whether it's Eastern or Western Bloc. You're right in saying it doesn't matter whether it's capitalism so-called or, again, communism so-called. So a lot of these states are not even communist. Yeah, Stalinism didn't have everything overlapping with Marxism. Still a shitty ideology. And you're correct to point out they're both shitty, but you're not looking at real capitalism. There's no nation in the world today with real capitalism. Iceland is about the closest thing you can possibly find, where they jail the bankers for defrauding people instead of jailing people for protesting the bankers that have defrauded them. That's the state of the world today. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, it could easily lead to World War III. Somebody pushes their profit margin or their ideology a little bit too far, and all of a sudden the nukes start flying. Yeah, that's true. I would say to those that are interested in the survivalistic element, that post-war they'll be fine because they can raise their food. That's true, but your food will glow in the dark. The fallout will be worldwide. I've already discussed this before. Many of you probably haven't even heard of the concept. The bombs will release radiation, but so will the nuke plants that melt down, and they're going to release 10 times as much, and it'll go worldwide. It's something that we should seek to avoid if you really want to ensure your chances of survival. Another thing you should be doing is boycotting every form of nuclear energy. I know France has nuclear energy. Most European nations do to some extent. The United States and Russia certainly do. We should get rid of as much of it as possible, as quickly as possible, because if all those plants melt down in addition to thousands of nukes going off, it's going to be 1,000 times worse. It's going to release a slew of alpha particles that'll be deadly to basically every living thing on the surface of the planet. The most advanced life form that'll be left is a tardigrade, or maybe an octopus or something like that if we're really, really lucky. Mankind wouldn't survive the encounter. Mankind would be completely screwed. When you watch, I'm sure you have, Dr. Strangelove, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, the idea of the doomsday weapon could have been loosely based on the very existence of nuclear power. Many people, unfortunately, haven't thought of this. And even those third world tribes that all of these social justice warriors love so much, because they're not white and they're not Western, they'll die too. With hideous tumors. Every single one of them will keel over. Without access to a radiation treatment, they'll die even quicker. Yeah. So there's a little bit about what Varg said. I admit, yeah, the Western world thrives on war. Unfortunately speaking, we'd be so much more wealthy if we didn't, if we actually had real capitalism. But you can't say that is real capitalism because it's not. If you want to split hairs and say, well, Norway's not capitalistic, it's actually communism. Well, the kind of a loose definition that you're using there, let me take that on a token. Okay, well, then the Western world's not really capitalistic either. It's an interventionist system. It is. It's not, you pay a huge proportion of your money out as taxes. Those taxes are used to go fund more wars, give free money, of course, to our greatest ally, which is somewhere in the Middle East, the nation that shall not be named, the one that's got wildfires raging right now, and they immediately blamed a bunch of Arabs and Palestinians for the problem. They can't even consider the fact that somebody was just trying to light up a cigarette, threw their match away, oops, yeah, there's a wildfire because it's hot, dry, and windy. They can't even think of that because it wouldn't fit their bottom line. Yeah, there are some holes in the argument. Overall, though, the basic summation of corporatism, not capitalism, versus, I don't know, corporate communism or whatever you want to term it. Yeah, you're right. It is true. And goods are made to break down. Although I've had some good luck with some recent goods. It's kind of hit or miss. It depends on whether the company caters for quality or whether it caters for, it's a cheap good. And there are both, let's face it. Not in a communist country, necessarily. That's about all. Peace out.